Oh, Tor, I almost wonder if you've read my book already, because it sounds like you're quoting from it. Actually, in some of these regards, it's amazing. That's why I'm so happy to talk to you. That is the classic liquidity crunch that is historically hit commercial real estate. It's during downturns, the big capital providers, the institutions just stop. They just put the brakes on. And so capital just dries up. And before crowdfunding, sponsors had no access. Even their existing legacy investors kind of hunkered down to see what was going to happen. And yet there's this enormous community of investors that have never had the opportunity to invest before, who would love to invest during a downturn. It's the perfect example. All right, so you had this 6-week pause. You did a lot of work. Tell me what you saw. What were the first signs that you saw of the power of the alternative that you were providing to sponsors? What were the first indications that you got?
Yeah, I think it was, again, number one, the sponsors that were knocking on our door, right? That we had conversations with, but now said, look, I want to look at doing this and I'd like to launch my deal in June or July, right? Not I'm thinking of this for post-recession, but I want to do it right now. That was one. And if you remember at the time, during this time, there was also the debt markets were freezing up, right? And so, we were talking to players like George Smith Partners, who are very tied into that, to say, okay, let's watch week by week and see how things change. And so we would be talking to industry experts around the debt markets to say, hey, these are great deals, but they couldn't get through the debt, the term sheets on their debt. So we started to see that unlock a little bit in June, right, and July timeframe, which really helped, right? Because as we know, got to have the debt in place to have the equity. So that really helped to see that turn a little bit. And again, there was a shock to the system in March and April. So it took a little bit of time, understandably. But the good news, compared to the Great Recession, didn't go on for years. It really was a short-lived kind of shock there. And then a recognition of like, hey, this is going to work out okay. It can take us months down the road. We also saw, again, another phenomenon that was happening that played right to our investment thesis was the secondary market phenomenon, right? Cities like Nashville, Austin, Charlotte, Miami, places outside of New York and San Francisco, where people said, wow, those are going to be growth markets, right? And that had been part of our investment thesis. So, for example, ground up multifamily projects, which could be coming out of the ground in 9, 12, or 18 months, people had the foresight to say, hey, those projects in those secondary markets, when they come out of the ground, it's going to be boom time in those markets. More and more people are going to continue moving to those markets. More businesses are going to recognize they can have distributed workforces. Let's play into that new kind of scenario. So those were a few things that we really saw. And again, the sponsors were there and ready to go, right, with these great projects that they could put on the platform.
And what kind of reaction did you get from investors? Again, now we're still at the absolute debt. Sponsors are keen to get deals done, but how did investors respond to that?
It was amazing, right? I mean, and again, past the March, April timeframe, where again, just outside of just investments, people and their families and their personal life were having to pause and figure out which way was up, right? Once they got past that, the retail accredited investors across the country that were on our platform were very excited, right? And again, they'd seen a Dow that had gone down 10,000 points. And whenever that happens, and even though it came back, people go, I can't put all my eggs in one basket. I need to get 10 or 20% of my allocation into alternatives. And this is a great way to do it. So we actually saw huge investor demand. We saw deals that were getting oversubscribed in not days, but hours and minutes, right?
It was amazing. So I worked on a deal on the platform in the summer, and we were just blown away by the enthusiasm. It was extraordinary. The height of COVID.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So it was, to your point at the very beginning, it was almost a counter recessionary kind of phenomenon that would happen. And I had talked to some very large industry experts several years ago as we tried to build the hypothesis for what happens to the marketplace in a recession. And many of them actually had that same viewpoint. They said, I think, Tor, your marketplace is the place to be as the recession hits, because it can pivot, it can adjust. It is open to individual investors, not a money manager, institutional investor that has a different viewpoint than an individual does, who's trying to put capital to work for their own portfolio.
That's absolutely
not somebody else's portfolio, right?
Exactly. It's a different type of fiduciary responsibility. Instead of to shareholders, it's to yourself and your family, right? Exactly. So you make a different decision.
Yes, exactly.